For 11 years, I thought I knew exactly who my best friend was. I would have put my hand on a Bible and sworn that if the whole world turned against me, she'd be the one person standing at my side. Then one Tuesday night, her phone didn't hang up properly after our call ended. For the next 4 minutes and 17 seconds, I heard her talking to someone else about me, and by the time I finally reached over to end the call myself, I understood that the woman I had trusted with every secret, every fear, every version of myself I'd ever been ashamed of, had been someone else entirely the whole time. This is that story. Stick around till the end, because the way it resolves is not what you're expecting. And if you've ever had a friendship you'd have staked your life on, I want you to ask yourself, while you're listening, do you actually know what happens to your name when you're not in the room? Let's get into it. My name is Ethan. I'm 31 years old, and until about 8 months ago, I would have told you that Jenna Ashford was the most important person in my life outside of my own family. We met when we were 7. Second grade, Mrs. Delacroix's class assigned seats in alphabetical order that happened to put us side by side. She had a box of 64 crayons and I only had the box of 8, and she slid the box across the table between us without anyone asking her to. That's the whole origin story. A box of crayons. It sounds too small to matter, but I think about it all the time now because it's the first data point in a pattern I didn't let myself see for over 2 decades. We were inseparable after that. Same middle school, same high school, the kind of friendship where you're mistaken for siblings at every family gathering that isn't actually your family. She was the maid of honor stand-in at my cousin's wedding when the actual maid of honor got food poisoning, and she gave a speech about a bride she'd met twice and somehow made half the room cry. That was Jenna's gift. She could read a room, find exactly what it wanted to hear, and hand it over wrapped in a bow. I want to be fair to her in this story because I think it's important. She wasn't a cartoon villain. She drove 4 hours in an ice storm to sit with me in a hospital waiting room when my father had his first heart scare. She remembered the anniversary of my grandmother's death every single year without being reminded, and she'd send a single text, "Thinking about you today." Nothing more, nothing less. She knew exactly how much weight I could carry on that day and never overloaded it. So when I tell you what I heard on that phone call, I need you to understand I'm not telling you about a stranger. I'm telling you about someone who knew the inside of my life better than almost anyone alive. We went to different colleges. She stayed in state, I went 2 states over, and the friendship somehow got stronger with distance instead of weaker. Long phone calls on Sunday nights, care packages during finals. When I moved back after graduation, we picked up like no time had passed, and within a year we were doing a standing Thursday dinner that survived 3 of my relationships, 2 of hers, 4 apartment moves between us, and a global pandemic that ended a lot of other people's friendships permanently. By the time I turned 30, my life had started for the first time to genuinely take off. I'd spent years grinding at a mid-tier engineering firm, and I finally got tapped for a project lead position overseeing a whole new division. Around the same time, I met Danielle. Danielle is steady in a way I didn't know I needed until I had it. She's a physical therapist, sharp, endlessly patient, the kind of person who remembers to rotate the tires on the car before I even think of it. 6 months after we started dating, on a weekend trip to the coast, I got down on one knee on a beach that was too cold for either of us to be barefoot on, and she said yes so fast she startled a group of gulls off the rocks behind me. Jenna was the first person I called. She screamed so loud into the phone that Danielle, 20 feet away packing up our picnic blanket, heard it and laughed. "I am going to plan you the wedding of the century," she told me. "I mean it. This is what I was made for." I believed her completely. I had no reason not to. I tell you all of this: the crayons, the hospital waiting room, the maid of honor speech for a bride she barely knew, because it matters that you understand the size of what I thought I had. This isn't a story about a shallow acquaintance who turned out to be fake. This is a story about the deepest friendship of my adult life and what it turned out to be built on. Here's the thing about betrayal, at least the kind that isn't a single dramatic event. It rarely arrives all at once. It leaves a trail of small, deniable moments beforehand, and if you love someone, you become an expert at explaining those moments away. Looking back now, I can count at least 6. The first was small enough that I genuinely forgot about it until much later. About 2 years ago, I was up for a promotion, not the project lead role, an earlier one, and I didn't get it. My manager at the time gave me vague feedback about needing to build more trust with the wider team, which confused me because I felt like I had good relationships with everyone. When I vented to Jenna about it that week, she was sympathetic in exactly the right amount. "Corporate politics are so fake," she said. "You're better than that place anyway." I remember feeling comforted. I didn't think to ask how she seemed to already know the specific phrase my manager had used, since I was almost positive I hadn't repeated it to her word for word. I brushed it off. People remember conversations differently. That's normal. The second crack came during my engagement. Danielle's mother, Carol, is a warm woman, but she runs hot and cold fast. And about 2 months into the engagement, she started acting strange around me. Clipped in texts, distant at a family dinner, asking Danielle pointed questions about how well she really knew me that Danielle later told me about, confused and a little hurt on my behalf. When I asked Jenna if she had any idea why Carol had suddenly cooled off, she shrugged and said something about future mothers-in-law being unpredictable and territorial. "Some women just don't like sharing their daughters," she said. I remember thinking that was a strange, oddly specific thing to say, but I let it go because it fit a story I already believed about difficult in-laws. The third crack was about wedding planning itself. Jenna had appointed herself the default point of contact for our wedding planner, our caterer, and eventually our venue coordinator, which I was grateful for at the time. I was slammed at work with the new project lead role, and having someone I trusted handling logistics felt like a gift. But small things kept going sideways. A deposit that didn't go through and had to be repaid. A guest list version that got sent to the venue with names missing, including, notably, 2 of my closest work friends who I'd specifically asked to be included. Jenna apologized every time, blamed vendor confusion or bad email chains, and every time I believed her, because why on earth would she lie about something like that? The fourth crack, in hindsight, is the one that should have told me everything. About 4 months before the wedding, I found out, through a print shop of all places, that a save-the-date version had gone out to a chunk of Danielle's extended family with the wrong date on it. Not a typo. A date 3 weeks later than our actual one. When I called Jenna in a slight panic, she was so quick and so smooth with her explanation. A printing error, a template mix-up with an online service, that I never once considered it might not be an accident. She even offered, unprompted, to personally call every single person who'd received the wrong card to correct it, which felt like exactly the kind of above and beyond thing Jenna always did. I thanked her. I told her I didn't know what I'd do without her. I meant it. The fifth crack was quieter, and it's the one that haunts me most now. Around that same time, I started noticing that whenever I had genuinely good news, the promotion finally coming through, Danielle and I closing on our first house together, Jenna's reactions had a beat of delay in them. Not long, maybe a second and a half, a flicker before the enthusiasm switched on, like a light with a faulty connection. I noticed it. I named it to myself once, lying awake at night, and then I did what I always did. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my own insecurities onto a friend who had never given me a real reason to doubt her. The sixth crack is the one I feel the most stupid about, because it was the most direct. About 6 weeks before the wedding, a mutual friend named Priya mentioned, almost in passing, that Jenna had told her the wedding budget was a lot more than I could really afford, and that she hoped Danielle knew what she was getting into. When I brought it up to Jenna, hurt and confused, she was immediately powerfully apologetic. She said she'd been venting about her own financial stress, and it had come out sounding worse than she meant it. That of course she supported us. That Priya must have misunderstood the tone. I apologized to her for even bringing it up. I remember actually apologizing to the person who had, it turns out, been talking about my fiancé behind my back. Every single one of these moments, on its own, was survivable, deniable. The kind of thing you forgive because the alternative, that your best friend of 2 decades is quietly working against you, is simply not a thought most people are equipped to have about someone they love. I want to say this clearly for anyone listening who's had a similar feeling in their gut they've talked themselves out of. The pattern is always visible in hindsight. It is almost never visible in the moment, and that is not a failure of intelligence. It's a feature of love. You extend the same good faith to people that you yourself would want extended to you, and some people are simply not building on the same foundation. I didn't find out how deep it went until 3 weeks before my wedding. And I didn't find out because I was clever, or suspicious, or investigating anything. I found out because of a technical glitch on an iPhone. It was a Tuesday. Bis pop. I remember that specifically because Tuesdays had become our wedding logistics call night, a standing 30-minute check-in Jenna had proposed months earlier to keep everything organized without letting it take over our friendship, which at the time struck me as such a thoughtful, considerate thing for her to suggest. That night's call had been ordinary. We talked about the seating chart, a disagreement between my mother and Danielle's mother about the order of toasts, whether the florist could actually deliver on the arch design we wanted. Around the 22-minute mark, Jenna said she had another call coming in, her mom, she said, and that she'd talk to me Thursday at our usual dinner. "Love you, bye," she said. "Love you too, bye," I said back, and then the call didn't end. I don't fully understand the mechanics of how this happens. Something about a swipe not registering, a phone getting shoved in a back pocket before the screen fully processes the hang-up. But my phone stayed connected. I almost hung up immediately out of habit. My thumb was actually hovering over the red button. But then I heard Jenna's voice again, not talking to me, clearly mid-motion, a little muffled like the phone was against fabric, and then a second voice, female. I recognized it almost instantly as Sarah Kowalski, another mutual friend from our college years, someone I liked well enough but had never been especially close to. It sounded like Sarah had been on a call waiting, or had just texted, and Jenna had switched over, except somehow my line stayed open in the background the entire time. I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because I think it matters for the integrity of this story. I did not immediately hang up. I told myself I was going to in just one more second, and that second kept extending, because within about 15 seconds of hearing Sarah's voice, I heard my own name. "Okay, so wait, back up," Sarah said. "What did Ethan say when the card thing happened?" And Jenna laughed. Not a nervous laugh, an easy, genuinely amused laugh, the kind you give when you're telling a story you've told before and know lands well. "He had no idea," Jenna said. "None. He actually thanked me for offering to fix it." I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to sit with it, live, in real time, standing in my kitchen with a dish towel still in my hand. He had no idea. He actually thanked me. I didn't move. I don't think I breathed for a few seconds. Some part of my brain was still trying to construct an innocent explanation. Maybe they were talking about something else. Maybe the card thing was unrelated. Maybe I was about to hear a story where I turned out to be the one they were protecting. Not the one they were laughing about. That part of my brain did not get to keep believing that for very long. "I still can't believe you actually changed the date on the Save the Dates," Sarah said, and I heard genuine, delighted disbelief in her voice, like she was hearing an especially good piece of gossip rather than reacting to something that should have horrified her. "That's insane, Jenna. I mean, it worked, didn't it?" Jenna said. "Half of Danielle's family from out of state almost missed the actual wedding. Would have been a whole thing." I remember my knees actually feeling strange, the way they do right before you sit down hard in a chair you didn't mean to sit down in. Sarah laughed again. "Okay, but why though? Like, actually why? You've been doing stuff like this for months. The budget comment to Priya, the guest list thing, I thought you liked Ethan." And here is the part of the call that changed the entire shape of my life. The part I have replayed in my head probably 1,000 times since. The part I could recite to you, word for word right now with my eyes closed. Jenna was quiet for a second, and then she said, in a voice that had dropped some of its earlier lightness, something rawer underneath it, "It's not about Ethan. I do like him, honestly, he's fine. It's just, do you know what it's like watching someone get every single thing? The promotion, the girl, the house, the wedding everyone's going to talk about for years. He doesn't even know how good he has it. He's never once had to actually fight for anything. Not really. And I've been standing next to him getting the leftovers of his life for 20 years, and pretending I think it's cute." Sarah didn't say anything right away. I remember that silence more clearly than almost anything else in the call, because it felt like even Sarah, who I don't think has ever been Jenna's closest friend, who I don't think even fully knew the extent of what she was hearing, needed a second to process it. "I'm not trying to ruin the wedding," Jenna continued, quieter now. "I would never actually let anything really bad happen to him. I don't know. I wanted, just once, for something in his life to not be effortless. For him to have to actually struggle for 5 minutes like the rest of us do." I stood in my kitchen and listened to my best friend of 22 years describe, in her own words, a quiet campaign of small sabotage she'd been running against my engagement, my wedding, my relationship with my future mother-in-law, and possibly my career, motivated by a resentment she had apparently been carrying. Since we were children trading crayons in a classroom I didn't even remember the smell of anymore, I hung up. Finally, my thumb found the button. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically, I just sort of folded. And I stayed there for what my phone later told me was almost 40 minutes, not really thinking anything in full sentences, just replaying fragments. He had no idea. It's not about Ethan. Leftovers of his life for 20 years. I didn't feel much of anything right away, if I'm honest. That came later. In that first stretch of time, I mostly just felt cold and strangely calm. In the specific way I imagine people feel in the first few seconds after a car accident, before the adrenaline tells the body how much it should actually be hurting. I want to walk you through the next several days carefully, because I think what you do in the immediate aftermath of a discovery like this matters just as much as the discovery itself. The first thing I did, once I could form full thoughts again, was open the voice memo app on my phone and write down, in as much detail as I could remember, everything I'd heard, in order, with approximate timestamps and direct quotes, where I was confident I had them close to word for word. I didn't do this because I was plotting revenge. I did it because some instinct in me, maybe the part of me that had spent a career in engineering, learning to distrust my own first impression of a problem, knew that shock does strange things to memory, my best friend Derek, and that if I was going to act on this at all, I needed to act on what actually happened, not on the increasingly distorted version my mind would produce after a sleepless night. The second thing I did was not call Jenna. Every impulse in me wanted to. I wanted to confront her immediately, to make her explain herself, to get it over with so the sick feeling in my stomach would have somewhere to go. But I've learned, the hard way, in other parts of my life, that the version of yourself that reacts in the first hour of a shock is rarely the version of yourself you're proud of a week later. So I didn't call her. I told Danielle I wasn't feeling well and went to bed at 8:30 that night, and I lay there in the dark turning it over. The third thing I did the next morning was tell Danielle. This was, without question, the hardest conversation of the entire ordeal, harder even than the one that came later with Jenna. I had to tell the woman I was about to marry that her mother's sudden coldness toward me, a rift that had genuinely hurt both of us and that Danielle had spent months quietly trying to smooth over, had apparently been engineered, at least in part, by someone I loved and trusted completely. I watched her face change while I talked, watched her go through something like the same collapse I'd gone through the night before, except hers was compounded by anger on my behalf, confusion about her own mother, and a strange grief for a friendship of mine she'd genuinely valued too. Danielle had met Jenna probably 200 times over the years we'd been together. She liked her. She trusted her. "What do you want to do?" Danielle asked me, once I'd finished, not "what should we do?" Not "here's what I think we should do." "What do you want to do?" I remember being grateful for that, because it would have been easy for her to make this moment about her own anger, and instead she made room for mine first. I told her I needed a few more days before I decided anything. The fourth thing I did was quietly, carefully verify what I could. I'm not proud of describing this as an investigation because it makes me sound more composed than I felt, but that's functionally what it was. I called the print shop that had produced our save the dates and asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether they had any record of a date change request on our order. They did. It had come from the email account Jenna had access to as our logistics point of contact, submitted 11 days after our original order, with no communication to me about it. I called our venue coordinator and asked gently whether the missing names on that guest list version had been an error on their end or something submitted to them directly. They confirmed the version they'd received had simply never included those names, meaning it hadn't been lost or garbled in translation. It had been sent to them that way from the start. None of this was hard to find. It hadn't needed to be hidden particularly well, because no one had ever had a reason to look. The fifth thing I did 4 days after the phone call was ask Jenna to meet me, not at our usual bar, at my house in the afternoon, when Danielle would be at work and we could have real privacy. I told her I wanted to talk through a few wedding details. She said, of course, like she always did, and I remember hanging up the phone and feeling a strange, hollowed-out kind of grief, because some tiny, stubborn part of me was still hoping, right up until she walked through my front door, that there would turn out to be an explanation, that I'd somehow misheard, that this would resolve into something smaller than what it actually was. It did not. Jenna arrived at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a bag of pastries from the bakery near her office, which she set down on my counter with the same easy warmth she always had, like nothing in the world was wrong, because as far as she knew, nothing was. I let her sit down. I let her start talking about the florist's latest email before I said anything. I wanted to watch her, just for a minute, be completely herself, unguarded, because I think some part of me needed to see, one last time, the friend I thought I had before I dismantled her. I need to tell you something, I said, once she'd finished talking about the arch design, and I need you to just listen before you respond. She nodded, immediately shifting into a kind of concerned attentiveness that I now recognize, looking back, as a performance she was extremely good at. I told her about the phone call. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize much. I mostly just repeated, as close to verbatim as I could, what I had heard. The save the dates, the guest list, the comment to Priya about the budget, and then the part about Carol, which I watched land on her face like a physical blow, because I don't think she'd realized, until that exact moment, that I knew about that piece too. And then I repeated the part about the crayons, not literally, but the 20 years of leftovers line, because I wanted her to understand I wasn't guessing at a motive. I had heard her state it herself. I want to describe her face during this, because I think it matters. She didn't gasp or launch into denial. She went very still and very pale, and for what felt like a genuinely long time, probably closer to 15 or 20 seconds, she said nothing at all. I've thought about that silence a lot since. I think it was the sound of someone realizing there was no version of this where she could talk her way back to where she'd been an hour earlier. "How much did you hear?" she finally said. Not, "What are you talking about?" Not, "That's not what happened." How much did you hear? An admission, whether she meant it as one or not. "Enough," I said. What followed was close to an hour of conversation that I'm not going to reproduce in full. Because a lot of it circled the same handful of points, and because some of what she said in that hour was clearly raw and unfiltered, in a way I don't think is fair to broadcast in complete detail. But I'll tell you the shape of it, because I think the shape matters more than the specific sentences. She didn't deny any of it. To her credit, once the initial shock passed, she didn't try to relitigate the facts. What she tried to do instead was explain the feeling underneath it. A lifetime, by her account, of being quietly positioned as the sidekick in her own life. The friend who was fun but not the one people noticed first. Competent but not the one people bet on. Present, not the one people of mine at every milestone of mine, but never quite the one having milestones of her own. She told me about a therapist she'd stopped seeing 2 years earlier because she didn't like where it was going, which was, I think, the most honest sentence she said to me that entire day. She told me she loved me, genuinely, and I believe that part. I still believe that part, and that the love and the resentment had somehow been running on parallel tracks for years without her ever really letting herself look at both of them at once. "I don't expect you to understand this," she said, near the end, "but I never wanted anything actually bad to happen to you. I wanted things to be a little bit hard. That's it. I wanted you to have to work for something the way I've had to work for everything, my whole life, next to you." I told her that intention doesn't erase the fact that she'd tried to fracture my relationship with my future mother-in-law before it had even properly begun, that she'd made Danielle's family question my judgment and hers, that she'd nearly caused half those relatives to miss our wedding entirely. That a little bit hard is not a neutral, victimless thing to want for someone you claim to love. It is, in fact, a decision to cause harm, dressed up in language that made it easier for her to live with. She didn't have a good answer to that. I don't think there is one. I did not invite Jenna to the wedding. This was, somehow, the hardest sentence of this entire story for me to actually say out loud to other people in the weeks that followed, harder even than describing the phone call itself, because it made the whole thing real and final in a way that just being hurt hadn't. Removing someone from your wedding who has been in every important photograph of your life since you were 7 years old is its own specific kind of grief, separate from the grief of finding out what she'd done. I did talk to Carol, my mother-in-law, directly, a conversation I dreaded almost as much as the one with Jenna. I told her as gently and honestly as I could what I'd learned, and I watched a woman who I'd assumed simply didn't like me visibly recalibrate an entire narrative she'd been carrying for months. She apologized for the distance she'd put between us, distance she now understood had been manufactured by someone outside our relationship entirely. We are genuinely in a much better place now than we were even before any of this happened, which is a strange silver lining I did not expect. I also had a harder conversation with Sarah, the friend on the other end of that call. I wasn't angry at her the way I was angry at Jenna. She hadn't orchestrated anything, she'd just been a passive audience to someone else's confession, and I don't think most people, hearing a friend unload something like that in the middle of an ordinary phone call, would know exactly how to respond in the moment either. But I did tell her, honestly, that laughing along with it, even out of surprise, even without malice, hadn't been nothing. She apologized. We're still friendly, though it's different now, more careful on both sides, and I think that's honest and fine. Jenna reached out several times in the weeks after our conversation. Long messages, at first defensive around the edges, then gradually more genuinely remorseful as the shock wore off for both of us. I didn't respond to most of them. My best friend Derek. I did eventually write her one message back about 6 weeks after the confrontation, telling her that I didn't hate her, that I believed the resentment she described was probably real and probably painful for her to carry, and that I hoped she'd actually go back to therapy and do something real with all of it. But I told her I couldn't be close to her right now, and that I didn't know if I ever would be again, and that this wasn't a punishment, it was just the honest state of things. She wrote back a short message that said, simply, "I understand. I'm sorry. I mean that more than I've ever meant anything." I believe her. I think that's allowed to be true, and for it to also be true that belief doesn't obligate me to let her back into my life on the same terms as before. The wedding itself happened 3 weeks later, smaller in one specific way than we'd planned. One fewer person standing near the front, one name missing from the seating chart she herself had once tried to alter, and it was, despite everything, one of the best days of my life. My father stood in the spot that would have been Jenna's. Danielle's family, all correctly informed of the actual date this time, showed up in full. Carol gave a toast that meant more to me than she probably realized. My binds in Sloan. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what actually happened here, and I want to share a few things I've landed on, because I think they might matter for anyone listening who has a friendship that's given them the same quiet, dismissible feeling I kept explaining away for 2 years. The first thing is that resentment and love are not mutually exclusive, and that's a genuinely uncomfortable thing to sit with. Jenna's love for me, I believe, was real. Her resentment was also real. People are allowed to be complicated, but complication is not an excuse, and I had to learn the difference between understanding someone's motive and excusing their behavior. You can hold both. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't obligate you to keep standing where they can do it again. The second thing is that the small, deniable moments are worth naming to yourself, even if you don't act on them right away. I'm not saying you should treat every friend like a suspect. I'm saying that the version of me who noticed the beat of delay before Jenna's excitement, who noticed the suspiciously specific phrase repeated back to me, who felt a flicker of that's odd 6 different times over 2 years, that version of me was right every single time. I didn't need to blow up my life over those flickers, but I wish I'd trusted them enough to actually watch a little more closely instead of talking myself all the way back down every time. The third thing, and maybe the hardest one, is that not every friendship is supposed to survive discovering the truth about it. And that's not a failure on your part. I spent a long time feeling guilty for cutting Jenna out, like a better, more forgiving person would have found a way to rebuild the friendship from the ground up. I don't think that's true. I think some ruptures are information, not just wounds. What I learned about the foundation of that friendship wasn't a single bad decision I could forgive and move past. It was 2 decades of a story I'd only ever heard one side of. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this: pay attention to how people react to your good moments, not just your bad ones. Anyone can show up for you in a crisis. It's easy, it flatters the person showing up. The real test, the one I failed to give enough weight for over 20 years, is how someone's face looks in the half second before they remember to be happy for you. Jenna and I haven't spoken in about 5 months now. I don't know if that's permanent. I've stopped needing it to resolve into a clean answer either way. If you've made it this far, thank you for sitting with this story with me. If something in it felt familiar, a friend whose reactions never quite land right, a pattern of small, explainable coincidences that keep adding up to something you don't want to name, I'd genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes just writing it down, the way I did that night on my kitchen floor, is the first step toward actually seeing it clearly. Sitter if you want more stories like this one. And the next time your best friend's call doesn't quite hang up all the way, you might want to keep listening a little longer than you think. I'll see you in the next one.